I have spent a large part of my career being told that I'm aggressive, not assertive. And had I shrunk from that feedback and went, oh, they need less of me, so I'm gonna give them less. I didn't ever do that.
Welcome back. Today we are speaking with the amazing Aimee Christian, a globally recognized communications executive with over 25 years of leadership experience in Fortune 500 companies. She is known for her innovative storytelling, crisis management expertise, and inclusive team leadership. Aimee leads a dynamic portfolio career as a CEO of Yes Communications, president of the Massachusetts Society for Medical Research, and a full professor at Boston University. So what do we talk about? We talked about managing bomb threats and anthrax and a box of wigs. We also talked about how encouraging team members to share the 10 slides about themselves really revolutionized the career of someone that she worked with. Now, a reminder, if you're new to the podcast or if you've been listening for a while and you haven't yet clicked subscribe, please do so, because we are thrilled you've taken time out of your day to learn and grow with us. Make sure you don't miss those future episodes. So let's do it. Join me, Gill Nelms, on today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast, where I'm joined each week by industry experts for intimate and eye-opening discussions about the challenges and joys facing the leaders of today. Listen in and get ready to scale your company, grow your brand, and unlock your full badass potential. So in the idea of trying to, start strong and spark some curiosity with our listeners, I want to know, you have spent 25 years rising through the ranks in corporate biopharma. So what made you brave enough to walk away and design a life on your own terms?
That's a great question. And I think it was really around my interest and desire to figure out how I could do the things that I wanted and end up having the time in my day to really do the things that bring me joy. And I had a sequence of roles, I'll just be really, really honest, that that disappointed me. They either were not what I was told the job was going to be, or it was they gave me the job, and then 2 months later it was almost like a bait and switch, and it switched on me. And then in the last role that I took, where I really stepped away, I felt as though my leadership qualities that I find to be really important to my ethos was not really accepted in the environment in which I was in. And so I had an opportunity to step away with some security where, I am the sole breadwinner of my family. I didn't have the luxury to be like, screw this, I'm leaving.
Peace out.
You can't do that in the real world. And so I found myself in a situation where I was going to be able to walk away from a role and have some financial security to reflect and to think about what it is that I really wanted. And that in and of itself was incredibly freeing. So I left that role not knowing what I was going to do, much to the horror of my husband, if I'm being perfectly honest. He was like, "You did what?" And I was like, "It's going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. I just need to figure this out." And it was at the same time that the election was happening. And I thought, you know what? I have money. I have my salary. I'm going to go volunteer in this grassroots effort. And I'm going to let go a little bit of what corporate life is. And I'm going to find new things to discover. And boy, did I discover new things. I really went headfirst into a local community grassroots organization, learned all about political communications, grassroots canvassing, organization, it was really, really fascinating. It was all volunteer, so it wasn't like a long-term solution, but it was really fascinating. And during that time, I also decided to invest in myself and go to a professional society meeting that I had planned to go when I was in corporate, but then, obviously I needed to fund my own way. And I decided to do that. And it ended up being probably the best decision I ever could have made for myself, because it was at that meeting that I learned about the academic opportunity that I currently hold.
I love this. Okay, so now we're going to rewind a little bit. I am very passionate about the audience getting to know humans as humans. So in the intro, we've talked a bit about your successes and the leadership and stuff that you do. And I can't wait to get to the point where we start talking about communication and reputation management and that piece of it. So that's a teaser. We will talk about that later. Make sure you listen to the full episode. But let's rewind. And Aimee, tell us who you are as a human being, like behind not what's on LinkedIn, but who are you as a human being?
It's so funny that you asked me this question, because one of the things that I do with my team, whenever I've had a job, and now that I do with my students in my classroom, is I take a fair chunk of time and I give an assignment to present what I call my life in 10 slides. And
yes,
so
I love this.
I have done this for years. I have made my teams do this for years, for the express purpose that I feel like it's vitally important that we all get to know each other as people. If we're going to advocate for one another, work with one another, figure things out together, I think we need to understand the lens by which many of us make our decisions. Now, my lens is, I think I alluded to before, I am the sole breadwinner of my family. When my husband and I decided to have children, he felt very strongly that a parent should be home raising the children. And I said, that's fantastic. I make twice as much as you, and I love my career path, so you're it. And
I love it.
He was like, absolutely. So he left the workforce, and we kind of, quote unquote, reversed roles, in that I became the breadwinner, and we followed my career trajectory, which has its ups and its downs, just like every other couple in the world. But it was the right decision for us. So I have 2 kids. And the fact that they were able to see us in these quote unquote different roles, I think ended up, now that they're 20 and 23, we've understood what impact that had on them. And it was all positive. So because we were following my career trajectory, we ended up in Europe for 10 years. We ended up in California. We ended up near Boston. Now I live in Maine, and my kids are off doing what they want to do for their lives. So I would consider myself very fast-paced. I'm incredibly organized, and I am what they call a direct communicator, which has its great positive points, but I've had to learn how to sleep on things, and not and get to the point where I truly understood that not everybody needed nor wanted my opinion in every situation. So being a direct communicator, you do have to learn those skills. So that's me in a nutshell. My kids are a huge part of who I am, because I very much feel as though they are an extension of a life well lived. My daughter is a junior at the United States Naval Academy.
Amazing. Wow.
Yep, she is amazing, and she is an engineering major. And my son decided to actually go back to Europe when he was going to university, and he's just graduated and is doing graduate school in London. And so he is building his own life overseas.
That's so empowering. And I will say also, I mean, I'm a female engineer. I personally think engineers are the best, but I am incredibly biased. So I will throw that out to the listeners. So one of the things then I want to skip to, because you mentioned direct communication, and the listeners know I love conflict. I love being able to resolve it in a way that drives towards communication and stronger bonds and stronger teams, organizations. And I really think when we're talking about the audience, the individuals who are coming in and maybe stepping into their first leadership position, or they desire to do that, the idea of conflict is terrifying. It's terrifying for most of the world. So I'm on this mission to try and reduce that fear. Now, there's also, as you mentioned, the word, when I hear of direct communication, I think of the book Radical Candor. Have you ever read it by Kim Scott?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. All right. It's one of my favorites. So, listener, I highly recommend it. I will say a more gentler book is The Making of a Manager, which has similar philosophies in that. But can you walk us through, knowing your direct communication style and also knowing you're an expert in communication and you're an expert in helping teams navigate through reputation challenges and that kind of stuff? How do you balance that? And what advice would you give to someone, especially I would say at this point, a female leader who's been told she's a direct communicator, which is often told to her in different words than that, and held to a different standard in the light of the world? What advice would you give to those individuals?
Be brave.
Yes.
And the way I say that is you are 100% correct. I have spent a large part of my career being told that I'm aggressive, not assertive. And had I shrunk from that feedback and went, they need less of me, so I'm gonna give them less. I didn't ever do that, and sometimes maybe to my detriment, sometimes maybe not. But it's been a lifelong practice to understand how to use my voice in a way that is balanced. And that is a skill, because what I'd really love to do when I was younger, I actually had a manager tell me that I was like a bull in the china shop. He wasn't wrong. However, had I been a man, I wonder how he would have couched that conversation. But what he did give me with that feedback is he gave me an opportunity for me to pause and reflect as to how I was being seen. Was I going to stop being a bull in the china shop? No, probably not. But I also learned that I needed to get to higher and higher levels in an organization in order to be able to use my skills for good. I.e., when I became a team leader, I became a voracious advocate for my team. It wasn't about what I was trying to do. It was really about what I was trying to help my team achieve. And so being assertive, aggressive, whatever you want to call it, actually is a good thing. When you are able to partner with leaders who really want to hear that kind of advocacy. What I have discovered in this portfolio career that I have created for myself is that I'm finally in spaces where my leadership capabilities are highly accepted and wanted and desired. And so my advice to your listeners would be like, if you don't feel like you're in the right place, go find another place.
That is such a great, I'm so glad you said that, Aimee. Such a great takeaway, because I was just thinking, I was actually told once that I needed to be less brave and badass. You know, this boss of mine knew that was like, that is my brand. I believe in it. I believe every individual has their own badass. It is the best that they can be at that exact day. And that so many people aren't brave enough to strive towards being their best. So I am absolutely not going to stop being brave and badass. But what you just said, Aimee, was a key, because actually in the situation I was in and the company I was leading, the board members, they couldn't handle that type of personality. It was the wrong place. It was the wrong fit. You know, I was really good at what I did and could be a great asset to a company, but not to that company and not to that board.
Right.
And so I found another place, just like you were saying, that really I could thrive in. And oh my gosh, my level of joy, my level of career progression. So let's talk about this, right? Because that's scary. And I'm going to tease the whole portfolio career. We're going to get back to what that is. So stay tuned. But I want to talk about this fear, because some of our listeners are going to say, okay, I'm being told this, and yet I can't just go find, especially in this market. I mean, it's, September of 2025. A lot of people are looking for jobs. How am I going to be brave enough? And what if I fail? What if it doesn't work? What if, all these what ifs? What advice would you give to that person who is stuck in that career space that's not benefiting and growing them, but terrified to make that leap?
Yep. I'm actually working with a mentee on this exact issue at this moment. And so when I started my career, I said to myself, I am going to give every company I work for 3 to 5 years of my life. And if within those 3 to 5 years, I am not growing, learning, I'm moving on. And a couple of companies I've stayed more than 5 years because I have grown and I learned things, and it was a really beneficial experience. A couple jobs I lasted a year or two because it was so exceedingly obvious that I was never going to, I was in the wrong place and I needed to just remove myself from the situation. But with every change, I mean, I am lucky in that I have a very supportive family that moved wherever my job was. And so I had a lot of mobility to be able to take the adventure to the next level. But the theory holds true that within 3 years, I would start to reflect, what am I getting out of this job? And what do I like? And most importantly, what do I not like? What do I not want to repeat when I move into a new role? And I've been really intentional about doing that my entire career. So when I look back, everything kind of made sense. At the time, I could lie and say, oh yeah, I was being so strategic, and I wasn't doing any of that. But what I was doing was being really true to my reflection on what I wanted to get out of this one big, beautiful life that we have on this planet. And I was not going to waste time doing something that did not serve me. So the advice that I would give to people who are terrified or feel stuck is to start that reflection. Articulate what it is you love about your role, and be honest about the crap that you hate, and start to explore. I mean, I tell my kids, because I want them to know that this is not an easy game. I have probably applied for thousands of jobs and interviewed for probably upwards of 100. And if you look at my resume, I've had 20 experiences. I've had 20 roles. But I'm always constantly exploring what could be out there. Now, 5 years ago, did I have a professorship, being president of a medical society, and being CEO of my consultancy on my bingo card? I did not. But when I look back and I see what I did in order to get to where I am, it all makes sense. Makes total sense.
Yeah, I love this. When I think of a lot of decisions that I've made is something you're talking about, being mindful and being reflective, which I think are two very powerful tools that we can use, because it's a little bit less about trying to say, oh, I'm absolutely going to be a CEO of a company one day. Okay, a young person may put that as right. It's not that. It's that what do I want to do? I want to be in rooms where I'm collaborating with people who are making an impact on the world and making the world around us a better place. I want to be in those rooms. So how do I get into those rooms? And what does that strategy look like? I think that also just the idea of when you and I were growing up, everyone was, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? What's your whatever? And when I ask some people about the legacy question, I get a lot of people that also say, well, I'm really just living for me. I don't care what other people think about it. And I think there's a combination of those pieces that you can have. And especially when you have a family involved, and especially when you're trying to make the world a better place, which I know you've done. And so one of the things I want to talk about in making the world a better place is I mentor a lot of students coming out of Georgia Tech and Emory that they are convinced their first job, whatever they pick, is the end all be all. It is going to set their entire career. They are so stressed about this. And you and I'd never heard the term portfolio career before, but you and I both have it. So here, my question though is, okay, so portfolio career sounds sexy on paper, okay, but what's the raw unfiltered truth about what that transition really looks like day to day? And how do you encourage individuals to start thinking with that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really felt like an incredibly natural transition, because I had spent so much time reflecting on what I really wanted to achieve. And in the moments where I, quote unquote, hated my job, I tried to articulate why I felt the way that I felt. And very often it was what you were saying, Angela, about I wasn't having the kind of impact that I felt I should have, or I wasn't in the rooms where I felt I should be. And so it became hugely frustrating to be getting older, to be, growing in my career, but still not being able to fulfill those two really important aspects of what I would consider success. And so I think then being open to all of the possibilities, I think, is then key. What you said about people being like, well, I'm going to be CEO, who knows? Maybe. But if you're so laser focused on that one thing, you will invariably absolutely lose out on perhaps 15 other things that could be really, really interesting.
You're absolutely right. I think that's the piece of it is, instead of saying I want to be this title, or I want to be in this level of position of power, what do I really need to do to feel fulfilled each day, to where I'm going into something and actually doing something I'm passionate about?
Yeah. And then once you can be all pie in the sky and be like, oh, I want to do this and this and this. There are logistical and financial aspects that you also have to think about. So when I declared to my husband that I'd love to teach, his eyes glazed over, because he was like, well, we can't live on a teacher's salary. And he's right. He's absolutely right. So I needed to figure out how to fill in the gaps to make sure that we are able to live the way that we want to live. And you have to think about those things. As much as you'd love to be like, well, I should be able to do whatever I want. You can't do that. So you need to be able to figure out what the puzzle pieces are, and then determine how to fit them together to give you the life that you desire.
So you and I are both very, very similar. And I run Biolosity. It's a commercialization program out of Georgia Tech and Emory, driving early stage medical technologies to market so they get to the patient and the clinicians as quickly as possible. So that is my official full-time job. I'm also a professor at Emory University, teaching a master's class in advanced therapeutics in the biomedical engineering department. And I also have my own consulting where I do coaching for teams, companies, and organizations. And so when I think about that, when I look at, for example, my life, it fulfills my passions of, I really want a legacy of trying to take things to patients as quickly as possible. I also love to educate the next generation. And then I love to help people live their true self. So when I talk to people, the reason I've pieced my patchwork together is it really ties to those things that I love to do. And hearing and reading about you, I see that you've done something similar. Now, my question to you is a burnout question. How do you put these pieces together? Someone's listening to this and they're thinking, I cannot, which is true, I cannot have 3 full-time jobs, right? I'm going to get burned out. I'm not going to spend time with my family. I'm not all of these types of things. So tell us about your journey walking through that and what advice you would give to someone who really wants to have it all without losing it all about what's really important.
Yeah. So I'm at the beginning of this journey. Maybe talk to me in 5 years and I'll change my story. But right
Stay
now,
tuned, listeners. We'll see what she says in 5 years.
Right now, the roles themselves give me an incredible amount of energy and inspiration. When the professorship came about, it's an endowed professorship. So basically, there was an individual at BU who was retiring, and it opened up this endowed professorship. And it's also a professor of the practice, which means that they were looking for someone to come in from a corporate experience and impart the practical knowledge that we've amassed for a 25, 30-year career, which meant that there wasn't a research responsibility. It's not a tenure track position. And so from a workload perspective, it's built to give you opportunity and time to do other things because they want you to be close to the practice of what you do. And I say that in that when people think of university professor or teacher or instructor or whatever, they have an idea in their mind of what that is. And I would, again, be open to learning more because when I learned about this position, I've never taught in a university, although I've done a lot of training, a lot of public speaking, and I have a huge passion for education, so I knew I'd really enjoy it. I didn't have experience. And so having a role like this was very serendipitous, but it also helped fit those puzzle pieces together to the extent that when I was offered the role, I started thinking, oh gosh, I need to fill in a little bit of time because I'm afraid that I won't have enough in my day and my week to keep me busy. So it was kind of the opposite problem. And at around the same time, the Massachusetts Society for Medical Research was looking to replace their president, who was also retiring. And I had never, and I have never led a nonprofit and been a nonprofit executive, but I knew my personality of lifelong learning. I was like, well, I can learn that. And so I reached out to see if there would be a fit. And as it turned out, they were actually looking for someone with communication skills because they have a huge need for a branding refresh and for a little bit more storytelling in the work that they do. So had I not reached out, I never would have found that out, and I would have lost out on that opportunity. I was very transparent with both organizations that I was looking to do both things, and they've been incredibly accommodating to enable me to have the time and the space to do both activities because they both see the benefits and the synergies of being a university professor and leading a nonprofit that advocates, educates, and communicates around biomedical innovation. So it ended up being a huge win-win for everybody. And then with my consultancy, that's the most flexible of all. Right now, I actually am not seeing any clients because I want to be able to focus on these two new things that I'm trying to build. But I look forward to being able to fit that in when the time is right, and I know that I have the bandwidth to do everything justice.
So a couple of things I really want to tie to. One is when you said the word being transparent with those companies and stuff, I was remembering when you were talking about being at a company for 3 to 5 years. And I want to encourage listeners. So I have said this, I've done this multiple times in my career. When I left Medtronic and I went to help run research at Emory Healthcare, I told the person who hired me, I will only be here 2 to 3 years. And during this period of time, this is what I'm going to bring to you. And this is what I want to learn. Okay. Fast forward in my job in Biologity, when Alyssa hired me, she said, I know you're probably only going to be here for 3 years. And I said, yes, I'll probably be here for 3 years. And maybe I'll find a great partnership with one of these medical technologies and I'll join their team. Who knows what I will do next? But I think that having the courage and being brave enough to be transparent in that. And I know a lot of individuals are terrified to do that because they think that they're not going to get hired if they say this. But the other thing that I would say is what I used to tell my team when we were building Florence Healthcare was that when I was hiring them, I would say, look, I want you to be here, 3 years. However, I also want you to grow so much in that 3 years that you don't want to stay, you don't want to leave because you're continuing to grow. Or if you do leave, you will reflect so positively on our company. People will say, wow, this person has grown, is amazing. This company must be amazing. So I think understanding and being willing to be vulnerable is really key. Now, a question I have for you now that you're going to start getting busier is, in wearing these hats that you have. So, the professor, you're an organization president, you're an advisor, and you at some point are going to start getting clients again in your Yes Communications company. So now what mechanisms are you going to use to decide what you're going to say hell yes to, or no, I'm not going to accept that next opportunity or position because it's going to lead to burnout? What are the metrics that you use to make that decision?
Oh, it's a great question. And I don't know if I've fully thought all of that through, if I'm being honest. But I think I would really lean on kind of just time. So the professorship is phenomenal because I know the days that I teach. I know the hours of the day that I teach, and those hours are sacrosanct. I am in the classroom. I am with my students. That will not change. Everything else is up for grabs, and so I need to. If I ever showed you my calendar, you would be like, "Oh my God!" I block out every single moment. If I have a haircut appointment, I block out the travel time before
Good.
and after it so I know intuitively how much available time I have in any given day. And I think that's a hugely important habit to get into, because otherwise you can lose control of your schedule so easily. And I think that's where a lot of burnout happens. I block out 5 hours a week for exercise. It's in my calendar. It's blocked out. It is unavailable for any other activity except for my exercise. I block out dinner appointments, breakfast appointments. I make it all very clear and transparent to myself, so I don't trick myself into thinking that I have more time than I do. And if I can do that, then by the end of the week, I feel as though I have accomplished what I set out to accomplish, and I didn't rob Peter to pay Paul in order to make all of that happen. The other thing that I do obsessively is write lists. I am obsessive about writing down my obligations, the things I have to do if I have an executive committee presentation to write. I'm doing, crazily enough, I'm doing a Pecha Kucha presentation in
Wait,
October.
what is that? What is that?
Pecha Kucha is a Japanese storytelling technique. I'm sure I pronounce it wrong, but it's Pecha Kucha, and it is a Japanese
Okay.
storytelling technique that you basically put together a slide presentation that is 20 images, 20 slides, and when you present it, each slide advances every 20 seconds, whether you want it to or not. And so you have to construct your narrative so as the slides behind you are progressing, people can follow what you're saying and it makes sense. I've always been fascinated with that kind of communication technique. And where I live, there is actually a Pecha Kucha society. And 3 times a year, they do these community events. So you can just sign up as a regular person and say you want to do this. So I have crazily agreed to do this at the end of October. The deck is due next week. And so high on my list of priorities is to finish this deck so I can get it off and it's no longer on my list. But that's how you can fit in all the things.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So now you've already answered this question a little bit by what you just said.
Yes.
And the question, and what's the question? The question is, what do you do to just have fun?
I cook. I exercise. I hike.
What's your favorite recipe?
Oh my gosh. Last night I made this amazing Middle Eastern chicken dish called chicken lababdar. And it was this beautiful sauce of tomatoes and onions and then turmeric marinated chicken and cream. And it was absolutely spectacular. So I like to make all sorts of different things. We never go out to eat because I'm always liking to experiment in the kitchen. It brings me a lot of joy and a lot of relaxation.
I feel like I just made the classic mistake of going to the grocery store hungry because I just asked you a question about food and I haven't eaten today. So now I'm really hungry. Okay, I want to dig into reputation communication because I think that especially as leaders are moving into roles and as you up your game in roles, then you have this fear that something's going to happen and you're going to be in this situation. I'm reflecting back to the days when I was at Medtronic and we had a defibrillator lead that was causing a whole bunch of problems. And I remember it being all over the news. I think it was on like 60 Seconds or something like that. It was 41.95. It was like 15 years ago. And I remember thinking how to communicate in a good way about what was happening and still maintain the reputation of Medtronic at that point. Okay, so my question is, I know that you've been in the war room during some major crises. What is one thing most leaders completely screw up when it comes to reputation management?
I would say there's kind of two things. One is that every crisis has its issues, but not every issue is a crisis. And learning to know the difference between those two things as a leader is vitally important, because if you treat every issue as a crisis, then you exhaust the team, you exhaust the market, and it really starts to erode your credibility. So that's number one. Number two is kind of what they say, preparing to fail, or failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I have been perplexed by the number of organizations that I go into that either don't have a crisis communication plan or don't want to do any sort of reputation risk analysis when it pertains to communications. I mean, every company has an enterprise risk management, but when you're thinking about how you would handle that from a communications perspective, I've been really surprised that some companies that I've worked for are like, do we really need that? And and it's crazy to me because if you console yourself by the fact that we've never had to actually deal with any sort of issue, so I think we're fine. You're playing a fool's game, because when you're in the middle of whatever may happen, that's not the moment by which you start to figure out what you want your crisis response to be. So when you're not mired in controversy, that's a perfect opportunity to start to look at your system, start to look at leadership, start to look at your communication plans, and build something that may spend its entire life in a desk drawer. That's a huge success. But not doing anything because you don't actually think it's ever going to happen to me is silly.
Okay, so do you have a real world example that you can share of either where preparing appropriately set teams up for success, or failing to prepare caused a disaster?
So I worked for a healthcare organization that interestingly didn't have a really comprehensive crisis communication plan. And in the 2 years that I worked there, I don't know if I was just really unlucky, or if I have no idea what was going on, but there were 2 instances where there was proposed anthrax being sent through the mail. So there was 2 instances where we had to manage a white powdery substance that somebody had discovered through the mail, plus a sexual harassment challenge that could have gone very, very public, and a proposed, it wasn't a bomb, but the way the package was set up, it was like very weird, scraggly writing and lots of stamps, and it was the hallmark, and no return address. It was the hallmark of what could have been a bomb. So we literally had the bomb squad come and open up this package, which ended up being wigs. An elderly man, bless him, his wife had died of cancer, and he wanted to donate wigs.
Wow.
Which was beautiful and lovely. But he went about it in such a wrong way that he created a crisis for us at the organization in which I work. In all 4 of those instances, which is crazy that in a 2-year period I dealt with those kinds of 4 different types of crises, it became a little bit of a disaster because there was no kind of playbook to follow, and every time we were making it up as we went along, which was absolutely not the way that we should be doing it. And at the same time, we were managing other leaders who felt that they needed to communicate. And so I had physicians tweeting on their Twitter feed saying, "Don't come to the hospital." And I was like, "What are you doing?" So managing through that, because we didn't have a plan, made it so much more difficult than it needed to be. I left that role with a crisis communication plan that we had put together, very comprehensive, with every anticipated issue that ever could have happened in an organization like that, with what we would do in those sorts of situations. But what was very interesting is they felt very comfortable because they had an operational crisis plan. So their operational crisis plan dictated like how to evacuate buildings, how to call in police, how to secure areas. So operationally, they were very, very prepared. What they didn't think about, nor really value in any way, was that we needed the same sort of thing from a communications perspective. Because when stuff like that happens, everybody wants to talk about it. And we needed to have a plan by which we could make that appropriate for people to do that. And so that's always been surprising to me when I join organizations where we have to build things like that, because they're so comfortable in that they might have an enterprise risk management plan or an operational plan, but they don't translate that into the communication space.
I love that you said the word playbook, because I was actually speaking at a conference this past week, and the topic was on data management and architecture and infrastructure in the medical space, right? And I was really nervous when they asked me to speak, because I thought, wow, it's been years since I built Florence. And instead, one of my friends said, you know what, just do what you do well, which is helping people create these sorts of playbooks and having the story tell. And so I did. I said, here is the playbook. And what I think of when I think of as well for a playbook, I think it's when shit hits the fan, you go look at it and say, okay, what do I need to remember? What do I need to remember and not forget, which can have different connotations? And what have we already agreed on when we're calm, our next steps will be? Right. And I love that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't express enough, when you're in the middle of a crisis is not the moment to figure out what you should be doing. It can't be the moment. And so, if you're in a role, any role, actually, you can be in any role in the company, and say, what are our plans? Like, what do we do if this happens or that happens?
So what we've learned thus far is be brave and jump into other roles. Calendar management is a super, what is the word? Jedi master tool, maybe a Yoda tool, and creating lists and creating playbooks and basically preparing. And I want to say a lot of that, like the playbooks piece and the blocking off and the creating lists, are the skills of slowing down to speed up. And I think a lot of us don't want to slow down and do those things so that we can actually go fast.
Yeah, and there's a lot around preparation. I mean, you can prepare your way out of a lot of situations. You can also prepare your way into a lot of situations. The way that I am able to balance all of the things that I am currently doing, and I'm very relaxed. I'm happy. I have a lot of joy. I feel like I have a lot of time. It's because I'm preparing into situations. I'm anticipating what my week looks like. I am blocking the time that I need in order to get the things that I need done. And I'm true to my calendar management to enable me to do all the things that I want to do. Because that's the name of the game. To give yourself enough, that's success to me, is to feel as though you have enough time to really do all the things.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. Okay, I want to jump really quick. You and I both work in the science world. And so in a world with all this misinformation that's going around, especially in science, how would you advise leaders and individuals to kind of cut through the noise, earn real trust, and really understand what facts and truth are?
Yeah, well, I think you are exactly right, that it all comes down to trust. This is really something that I grapple with every day. And one of the key reasons why I was really excited about this professorship role, because it's giving me an opportunity to kind of teach the next generation to work in facts, and to not get duped, essentially, by the onslaught of information that everybody is trying to manage on a daily basis. And if you're not knowledgeable on a subject, and the source that you're getting your information from is a source that you, for whatever reason, trust, it is very, very easy to fall into this misinformation trap. And so, so for me, it begins and ends with trust. You have to be able to know that the information that you're getting from this other source is steeped in facts. And therefore, the leaders who are giving you that information, they're in a position of power, and they need to use that power wisely, and they need to use it with integrity. And I think that is one of the most important things. I mean, we can disagree about a lot of emotional topics, but you cannot disagree when there's facts and data to back up what you're saying. And so, I get a little worried about where we are at the moment because to me, education has always been paramount. I got my PhD in biochemistry because my dad said to me, you go as far as you can go because no one will ever be able to take your education away from you. And, it's been a really powerful thing for me. I'm not a biochemist. I didn't stay in biochemistry, but I learned critical thinking skills. I learned to have an experimental mindset that I do take to everything that I do in everyday life. And I would hate for people to lose that as we are in this age of misinformation. It is shocking to me where I see people I know hear the most ludicrous things and their reaction is, okay, yeah, that tracks. I can believe that. And I'm like, what are you saying? Why aren't you asking questions? Why aren't you digging into it to try to figure out if that is actually true information? I could go on and on and on for hours when it comes to what leaders should do, but I think it's really important, this concept of integrity and making sure that you do the right thing even when nobody is looking is going to be the only way that we get out of the crisis that we're currently in.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing that I was just thinking when you said critical thinking skills, for example, the master's class that I teach at Emory, at the beginning of the semester, we put into our syllabus what our AI policy was. And I said to the students, let me be very clear. I want you to use AI to the maximum amount you possibly can. And I also want you to understand that whatever you submit, if it's not accurate, you are fully responsible for it. And so what would you say in an instance right now with people are really diving into AI and ChatGPT and Gemini and all of these things, right? How would you advise leaders? And then I want to talk about leading versus managing, but how would you advise leaders to embrace what they can for AI, but not lose those critical skills that we really need to be able to make sure the information is accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard someone describe AI once as a sidekick. And I love that descriptor because if you're going to use AI, and I use AI, absolutely, it's shortened the time that it takes me to get from point A to point B. For example, I now lead this medical society. I do board meetings every 3 months, and they require minutes for the board. I don't have time to then re-listen to the recording of the board and then type up notes. It is much easier for me to put the transcript into Perplexity, which is my favorite AI tool, and have it share with me a draft of board minutes that then I, as the human with the critical thinking skills, go through line by line and ensure its accuracy, because it's going to be about 80% accurate. And that's great. So I have to fix 20% of the things, but I have to fix the 20% of the things or else I haven't done my job in utilizing a tool. AI is a tool like you use every other tool in your life. And it cannot replace or circumvent the actual thinking that needs to happen when you are creating whatever you're creating.
So I named my AI, my ChatGPT AI, I named him Scout. And that's exactly what he does, right? And I say, help me find this, right? And I get a whole bunch of options. And then when I'm talking to students, I say, you know what, you can use AI to spark creativity in areas that you hadn't thought of before, right, and still maintain your authenticity and really create masterpieces that would take you 3 times as long and limit the ability for you to do other things. So there's value in that, but to not lose. Okay, so I want to talk about leading versus managing. I really also, I have like all these books I would love to write one day. So maybe I'll block off time in my calendar, Aimee, for that. But let's settle it. What do you think the real difference between managing and leading is, and how can you tell when someone is actually doing one versus the other?
To me, it's really around, I think, experience. So managers are about the work. The manager is there to make sure the work gets done. Leaders care equally about the work and getting the work done, but they also think about the experience that the person is having. One of the most exciting things I can do as a leader is enabling my team to do what they think is right. I think one of the biggest mistakes that leaders sometimes make is thinking they're the only ones in the room with the right answer. And so leaders have the ability to go with somebody else's idea, even if it's, sometimes it's a better idea, or an employee just has so much passion, that they're going to make that idea a success because they're so invested in their idea. And so your job as a leader is to support that, even if it goes wrong, and be able to advocate for that person, even if it goes sideways. Managers, I think, are very linear in their thinking, in that they're like, this is the right answer that we need to get to, and these are the steps that I want you to take to go get that right answer. Whereas I think leaders tend to think a bit more holistically about the experience that anybody should have to get to that destination.
Okay, that's amazing. So in talking about that then, what would you say is one underrated leadership trait that separates the good from the exceptional?
I think, again, it's around being able to think about you not always having to be right, and having the confidence in not only your own abilities, but also the ability of your team to help expand the knowledge. I mean, what I always love to say is, 1 and 1 could equal 5 if you let it. But if you're so stuck on what you think needs to happen, then you're taking away the experience from somebody else.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, then what would you define, Aimee? How would you define a badass? I mean, we're on Badass Leaders podcast. So how would you define, in Aimee's words, what a badass leader is?
So I think a badass leader is someone who knows their team as human beings and is willing to enable their team members' experience for better, for worse. So as a tangible example, I walked into a team at a company where I was told that the team was toxic, and I was there to come fix the team. And so I met with everybody, and there was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of, well, I don't like how she does things, and there was a lot of whining, a lot of it was toxic. So I implemented my life in 10 slides, and there was this one woman in particular who nobody liked. Nobody liked her. And if you talk to her this day, she'd be like, yep, nobody liked me. And it was really difficult because she kind of had this wall up about her, and it was very, very hard to do anything as a team because she was just so rigid. So we did this life in 10 slides. When we got to her, she explained that she was the first person in her family to ever go to college. And she was so smart that she got full scholarships to both this high school, this private high school, and then off to college. And upon reflection, she had recognized that because of this, she did kind of walk around with a chip on her shoulder because she had kind of gone through a lot of obstacles to get to where she was, and she had the impression that everybody had it easier than she did. She was very vulnerable in that presentation, and it was an aha moment for not only her, but for the entire team, in that they were able to see the lens by which she was coming to the table and she was making decisions. Fast forward 3 years, she was such a highly valued member of the team that she was promoted and given a role in Paris that she actually just finished, and she's now moved back to America. But had we not done something so seemingly insignificant as doing this My Life in 10 Slides, and had I not, as the leader of the team, kind of enforced this idea that we were all human beings and we all came at it with different perspectives and we all had to have our own experience, I wonder where she would have gone. I mean, it was just such a powerful experience, and it's been wonderful for her because she has grown tremendously as a leader. And it was wonderful for me because I got to see it all happen.
Yeah, which I think is like the greatest gift. Right. That's why we do so much of the work that we do, yeah. Is we want to be able to see that in other people, which is that is such an inspiring story. Okay. Are you ready for our rapid fire quick take questions?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it. What is one leadership idea or book that completely rewired how you show up in the world?
Yes. So early on in my career, I was told to read Start With Why by Simon Sinek, because we were going through an organizational transformation, and this particular leader thought that it would help me with the communication strategies that I was building. She was absolutely correct. I have become a huge fan of Simon Sinek since then. I've read all of his books. Leaders Eat Last is also one of my favorites, but I would highly recommend him for any sort of leadership inspiration.
He is, you should know, he is my dream guest for this podcast. I want to have him one day on this podcast. I'm obsessed with his Bit of Optimism podcast, and obsessed with him. And also, I love that he also shares vulnerably that he has severe ADHD, and he's only read one book from cover to cover that wasn't one that he wrote. Yes. Or that he was reading to help somebody else. And I think sharing that and having people understand someone who's such an amazing leader and has this piece of it, also have our own little challenges. So I'm so glad you mentioned Simon. We'll like tag it a gazillion times, so maybe it'll show up in his feed and he'll come be a guest.
And what was really funny was that I really fell in love with his work years before my husband started to see these books, come into our house, and he was like, "I went to middle school with Simon." I'm like, "Stop it!" And he's like, "Yeah, he was in my middle school class." I mean, we didn't keep in touch, but yeah, I went to middle school with him. I'm like, okay.
I love it. What a small world. I would love to know what he was like in middle school. Probably like a typical middle school boy. Okay.
Yes.
Here's our quick take 2. What's the biggest myth about leadership you wish we'd all stop believing?
Oh, I think I've already mentioned that leaders are the only ones in the room with the right answer. I have learned over and over again that championing somebody else's idea, either just because it's a better idea or because they have that passion, is the hallmark of the best kind of leader. I have seen leaders who push their agenda so hard that they literally push people out of their company. So it's a special skill for a leader to be able to enable somebody else to run with their idea and then take accountability if things don't go the way that they should. That is a great leader, and they don't always have to be right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So let's talk about legacy then. How do you define success now? You've talked a little bit about it, but how do you define success now, and how has that evolved since the start of your career?
So I would say two things. I mean, we've talked a lot about this, and I do personally define success in how much time I have to do the things that I truly want to do. And I consider myself very lucky that I have been able to figure out a career where I can do all the things that I love, still make the same salary that I was making when I was in a corporate entity, and learning that there is absolutely not one way to be successful. But the other thing that I think is really important, and what I've grown into, is the courage to ask for what you want and then figuring out how to make it happen. One really tangible example that I'm going through right now, which I'm really excited about, is that next semester I'm going to be teaching international public relations with my students. And as I was building the syllabus, because I lived in Europe for 10 years, I started thinking, I would love to bring at least a subset of my class to Europe to give them some opportunity to understand the nuances of language and culture and geography when it comes to building your career and figuring out your jobs. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to take the whole class. However, I did develop a proposal for bringing a small group of students to either London or Switzerland, the two places where I worked, over spring break. And I pitched it, and I got advocates, and fast forward only a few weeks, I currently have funding to do this curated program in this upcoming spring break. And if you knew how slowly academia...
I do. I work in academia.
I mean, you'd be amazed at, this accomplishment, but it really just goes to show that I had a good idea, and I got people to listen to it, and then we were able to make it happen. And so I could have easily sat on that idea and been like, oh, well, it could be fun if someday we do something like that. But instead, I turned it into action, and I'm now planning a week-long trip in March of 2026, where we're going to, I've reached into my personal network and made connections. We're going to have an experience at the BBC. We're going to do a corporate day. We're going to do an agency day. It's going to be really exciting.
Well, kudos to you, and kudos to Boston University, who actually took that up the chain and accomplished it. As I mentioned, my job is split between Georgia Tech and Emory University. I love these schools. They are also academic institutions, and it can be a struggle. But some people in our position might have said, I'll never be able to get approved, or it'll be a nightmare to get approved. It won't be worth it. And instead, you looked at look what the impact this could make. And the answer to any question not asked is always no. Yeah, and we forget that. The worst they can do is say no. And it's already no if you don't ask the question.
Right. Exactly. No, that's exactly right.
So tell the listeners how they can learn more about you.
They can follow me on LinkedIn. And I have been very lucky to sit through several podcasts. And so I really enjoy this medium. I've been able to talk about global communication plans on a Provoke Media podcast. And then I was very happy to sit in the Women in Leadership podcast with your colleague prior to this, at a time when I didn't know what I was doing. It was a really interesting time because I had left my job and I was volunteering, and I kind of knew what I maybe was going to do, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So it was a really interesting conversation.
Okay, great. If you send us links to those episodes, we will include them in the show notes so that listeners can watch and learn from them. And I think it'd be really amazing, too, to see in different environments and different... I will also give a ping. I am now the host of the Holy Shift Biomedical Breakthrough Shaping Tomorrow podcast, coming out of Georgia Tech and Emory as well. And I think it's fun to have the opportunity to speak in different areas. We're talking about research that's coming out of Georgia Tech and Emory University and why it matters and why it's making impact in the world. And those types of avenues, like what you just shared, speaking in these others, especially I love the women in leadership. So I'm excited. Send those links to us. Okay, a requirement of this podcast is that everyone has to share their favorite motivational quote. So Aimee, what is your favorite motivational quote?
So this motivational quote is more of a mantra for me. And I don't know who it can be attributed to, but I always say there is always a solution. A problem is only a problem because you haven't figured out what the solution is. And I use that almost daily with my kids when they come to me and they're like, oh, this is happening. I'm like, there's a solution. We will figure it out. But if you wanted a motivational quote attributed to an actual famous person, I would love to share that one of my idols, or maybe my absolute idol, is Julia Child. I love Julia Child. I think she is an inspiration. She started, doing what she did at 52. She's really done remarkable things, and she has been quoted as saying, "Every woman should own a blowtorch," and I couldn't agree more.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, Aimee, this has been amazing. As I say, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So thank you for saying yes to being a guest on the Badass Leaders podcast. And absolutely thanks for bringing the badass to the event today.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. It was really, really fun.
Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.